Hello students, Eric Magidson here. I like to do assignments that bring the value of the software that you're learning into play in your real life. And this is a great opportunity to do it as we learn more about Microsoft Excel. So in this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to create a personal budget sheet. And you're going to be able to use this budget to create a workbook of multiple sheets, each representing a month in a budget cycle. Now, for this assignment, we're just going to do 2 months. We're going to do a November and a December. And then we're going to do a total sheet that adds up November and December. But of course, you'd want to take this further and do a January through December with some references from previous sheets, which is one of the outcomes that we'll learn, in order to have a year-long budget to work with. So the first thing we need to do is put some column headings in here. So we're going to call this budgeted, okay, as that will be our budgeted amount. And then actual is what we actually either get in income or spend in expenses. And then we'll have a column for difference. Now, if we do our budget correctly, our difference should always be 0. If we have a difference, we want to make sure that it's a positive difference so that we don't end up with what's called too much month at the end of the money, meaning we run out of money before the month is over. And when that happens, we go to credit cards or other loans, and those can add up really quickly if we're not budgeting. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take these column headings and we're going to copy them down here to expenses. Now notice if I just simply paste with a Control V, it copies everything. It copies the formatting and it copies the content or the text. Well, I'm going to undo that. This time I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste just the values. Okay, so this time I'm pasting the values and not the formatting. Now as we look at this, if we use some common sense and critical thinking, if we budgeted $2,500 and our actual is $2,400, then we actually have a deficit of $100, meaning we're short $100 over what we budgeted, and we want to reflect that in the difference column. So I'm going to do equals, and I'm going to take the actual amount minus the budgeted amount. Now what we'll see is this is exactly opposite for expenses. Okay, so this is income, and we're going to say enter, and if you notice, I get a negative 100. Now I can fill this down, and if you notice here, I budgeted 5, and I actually have 600. Now, folks, I want you to stop for a minute. I want you to look at your own expenses, and if you feel comfortable, put real amounts that mean something to you. They don't have to be your exact income amounts, but something that means something to you. If you don't have 2 incomes, right click, delete this income. If you've got 3 incomes coming in, right click, insert, add some incomes. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do to finish off our income section is we are going to use some styling. So we're going to go up to styles and we're going to use the total cell style. Anytime we use this, this indicates to our reader of our spreadsheet that we are doing either totals or subtotals with the indication of that style. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals sum, and remember I don't use that easy button. I can get in trouble with this easy button if I'm summing a long list and say there's a value missing. It's only going to sum up to that empty cell. So I always put in the values. This is an important spreadsheet and I want to do it right. So notice here equals sum. Now I'll go ahead and click, and in this case I'll just select the range with my cursor and I'll tab over so I can double check, and that's indeed 3,000. I can go ahead and just drag that formula over. This happens to be 3,002. I want to make sure that it's summing what I expect it to sum. And then here I want it to sum as well so I can see the total, and in this case it's 0. Now let's go down here and do this for expenses and see what happens. Here I should end up with 0. Now the question becomes, let's find one that's different. Like here, I budgeted 175, but I only spent 85. That means that I have 95 or $90, should be 90, that I can put someplace else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals. Now remember last time we did the column C minus the column B. This time we're going to do the column B and subtract it from column C. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and fill up. I'll fill down. And I'm just going to check those. Yep, those should be 0. Up, there's a $5 over, so it's a negative number. So these are all looking correct. Now at this point, I can copy this one, select here, and paste it. And again, checking to make sure. Anytime we do a budget like this, if we're off by $1, that's not going to be good. And some people would tell you, if there's incorrect formulas within a sheet, it's actually worse than not having the sheet to look at the information, because we're going to make decisions based on wrong information. I'll come down here and do the same thing. Oops, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that. I accidentally hit copy. There we go. And now I'm going to come do the totals. So this time, because I know I need to do all these, I'm going to select that one. I'm going to hit and hold the control key while I select the other cells that I actually want to have the total cell style for. So I'll do that. And it looks like it added these. I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to copy this formula and bring it down. Now, notice what happened here. It did exactly what I told it to. In this case, I want to change these values to make sure they represent all of what I want in my summation formula. So I'll do that. 95 looks like I had 100 minus 5, 95. I'm ahead by $95 here. Now, I'd rather be ahead than behind in a budget. Okay? And if you notice here, 475 and 0, I'm going to double check these real quick just to make sure they're adding up what I expect them to. Adding up this way is okay. But let's see how this one added up. That one's doing that way. Let's see about this one. That one's doing that way. So let's go in and change this one so that it is adding the results in the column versus doing the multiplication by subtracting the budget from the actual. Okay. There we go. So now we've got a good sheet working. Notice if I come up here and change a number, say my budget went to 55, now I should have 5 over, and I do. And I also notice that my totals are changing as well. Now, what we really want is a quick graphical way to know when a number is bad. This is a bad number, it's negative. When a number is good, which means, okay, well here, this is good, I made more. Now, again, we don't want to do this all the time. We want to end up with this as sort of the perfect balanced budget, if you will, okay, which is 0. So let's go ahead and do some conditional formatting to get these to work, and then we'll apply that conditional formatting through our expenses. So if you notice, I'm going to click on one cell. I'm going to come to conditional formatting. Now, I could come to highlight cells rules and do a greater than, less than, or equal to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and do a new rule. Now, I'm going to move this over here, and I'll make that bigger in post-production. I'm going to come here to format cells that contain. My cell value, which is negative 100, I'm going to say if it is less than 0, let's go ahead and format that. We're going to just format the fill, okay? And if it's less than 0, that's negative. We're going to say that's bad. So we'll fill the cell and we'll say okay. Now I'll come back up here to formatting. I'm going to go to manage rules. And this time I'm going to add another rule. Again, a cell that contains. And I'm going to say if the cell is equal to the value of 0, which means I perfectly budgeted compared to my actual, I'm going to make that yellow. And I'll say OK. And then I'm going to do one more new rule. Again, notice I'm doing these all on this single cell. So this single cell is going to test these rules until it finds the rule that applies. Okay. Now, if we had multiple rules that could end up being true, it would apply the first rule that it comes to that is true. Okay. So here, we're going to say if it's greater than 0, we want to format that with green. And we'll say OK. We'll say OK. And then we'll double check our things. So if it's greater than 0, it's going to be green. If it's equal to 0, it's going to be yellow. If it's less than 0, it's going to be red. Well, indeed, this is less than 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my format painter, which means I'm not going to be painting the formulas. I'm going to paint the formatting, and notice conditional formatting. So as I look at this, this looks correct. I'm going to grab this one again. I'm going to paste it down. And I'm going to do that through my budget sheet. Then at that point, remember, you've heard me say this. Notice I'm going to have to change these back to total cell styles. So I'll do that real quick. You've heard me say it time and time again, audit your work, audit your work. Well, one way to do that is I'm going to hit the control plus the tilde, which students refer to that as the mustache. So control mustache, that's the key above the tab key. And I can see my formulas behind my values. So in order to get the value that shows up in B6, it's going to sum B4 through B35. And I can check these and make sure they're right. And in fact, they are. So I'll go back to control tilde. And now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this number to 1100, or I can change it to 1000. And that should be positive because I budgeted 12 but only spent 1000. But let's see what happens if I do 1300. What if I do 1299 cents? All right, so we see that that works. Now the other thing that I probably want to do is I want to indicate that we're working with dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight that, hit and hold the control key, and I'm going to select all of the cells. Now once I'm done selecting the cells, I can let go of the control key. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to choose accounting format. Now I like the accounting format because it moves the dollar signs away from the values. So I don't actually mistake this if I've got thousands or hundreds of values on a spreadsheet as 51,200. So now what I have is a master budget sheet that no matter what numbers I change, and you might remember that dynamic is good and static is bad. In none of my formulas am I using the value in the cell. I'm using a reference to the cell that then uses the value in the cell to do the calculation. So I'm not saying this equals 1200 plus 175 plus 50 plus 55 plus 100. You get the idea, because that would be static. And that means when I change these numbers, they wouldn't change in my formula. So I always want to do formulas that will allow the numbers to dynamically change as I change them. That's it for part 1. Make sure you check out part 2. Take care.